You're listening to the Cantina Cast, your home for thought-provoking Star Wars talk. Join Albert and Jonesy in breaking down the latest news, trailers, movies, and of course, your favorite characters from a galaxy far, far away.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Cantina Cast. My name is Albert Padilla, and this is episode 505, our final episode of coverage from Volume 2 of Star Wars Visions. We're going to talk about the last three episodes in no particular order. We just went straight through the order in which they were shown, but we're going to break each one of those down with, again, some really cool gems, I think, in this last bunch of episodes. And speaking of gems, I'm joined by none other than Jonesy. Jonesy, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. It's great to be able to wrap this coverage up. Again, 3 strong episodes, man. This season really brought it. So I'm super excited to talk about these last few.
Yeah. And as promised, I have it in notes. We will rank all 9 of them from our favorite to, or least favorite to favorites. Or how about all our favorites, but in order of all of our favorites.
Did you see what I actually called that segment?
No, I didn't. What did you call it? See, Albert's big, giant, jerk face ranking session of Visions 2. Yep. That's about right. I'll take it. It's fair criticism. So, hey, before we get started, people that are not jerks are our Patreon supporters and those in the chat.
Yeah, exactly. Now part of the tribe members: Rob, Mike, Lauren, Dante, Rist, Justin, Jackson, Sharkman, Dan, Daz, Isabella, Uncle Leon, Josh, Jacob, Steve, Reader Reborn, and our Delusions of Grandeur members: Rod, CJ, Alex, all in one breath. I'm getting better at this. Fantastic. I feel so good about myself. Thank you so much for being a Patreon. If you're curious about Patreon, if you're listening to this, cantinacast.com/Patreon. We have lots of great tiers, audio, video, little of everything for everybody. You get exclusive content only available through Patreon. You get to see our smiling faces on there, our smiling cat faces in some for some folks like you with their new kittens out there. So all the behind the scenes kind of goodness there. Something else that's also really exciting is Lauren just released a new Jedi novel archive as well. Mm-hmm. So over on cantinacast.com/YouTube, where you are watching this, if you're watching our live stream, you can actually go into our videos and you'll see Lauren's new one. If you were looking for how to get started back in the Star Wars books, she has an updated guide on how to do that. So it's something you're not going to miss if you've been curious about it, or if maybe you took a break and you need to get back into it. She's got you all set up there. So it's fantastic. Well worth the watch, well worth the time. She does an amazing job with these. So it's cool to have a kind of a refresh of that content over on the Cantina Cast YouTube site.
Yeah, and a question that comes up quite a bit, because it can be a little overwhelming, a little bit daunting in terms of, where do I start? Do I start with Legends? Do I start with new canon stuff? Where on either one of these timelines? We've got multiple, like, masses of timelines in canon now to talk about. So this is a good video to get started with, and I have a feeling that over time, she'll probably very likely update this and keep it relevant, which would be awesome. Because
a year and a half ago it was much simpler, right? Because you were in you were in phase 1 of the High Republic, so it's like, hey, this is the perfect place to jump on, and then you could pick up like Shadow of the Sith, Brotherhood, those kind of in between type of books, just as you want. But now it's a little more difficult. You got a lot of books out there, and a lot of great books too. Is really, and that's always the challenge part of it. So
yeah. All right, well, our main show again tonight, we're going to be talking about the Bandits of Golak, the Pit, and Au's song, which I always feel weird saying Au, like it's Au. Who was that? I forget the name of the actress. She used to do that. All right, but we're going to talk about all 3 of these, and let's start with the Bandits of Golak. So this one, first off, this is probably my favorite of the 3, for sure. And, like, I guess my initial thoughts, is probably the most culturally driven, aesthetically looking, like it looks like something from India, right, but yet it still has like the Star Wars elements. And I know it's always more than just throwing in a lightsaber and throwing in a TIE fighter that goes by in the background. You can't just do that. I mean, you can, but you're not going to get away with it. But there was something inherently about the story itself that definitely felt Star Wars in so many different ways, especially the female aspects of it all, the villains. There was to see the Inquisitors. Yeah, I mean, I really, really enjoy this one way more than I thought I was. And I was a little drawn back when I first saw the animation. I was like, okay, it's it's 3D animated. It doesn't look like our traditional, what I would consider, traditional, 3D animation that we would come to expect. It had like kind of an artistic flair, artistic twist to it.
Right.
But in the end, man, this was such a really good episode. And I'll get into more of this here in a little bit, but what are your kind of initial thoughts on it?
I mean, at the end of the day, it's all about the story, but you're right. The visual aspects of this short, nothing short of phenomenal. I mean, the visual, the colors, the vibrancy, it just screams India, which is just, I love Indian culture. I work with and I know you do as well, with a lot of Indians. And so to be able to see their culture on screen and have that to be able to kind of relate to them in a different way is really neat and fascinating. And I'm with you. The style of even when you look at costumes, and this is where the behind the scenes really helps enhance the content, is they started with very traditional garb, with very traditional dress for these characters. And then they moved into the Star Wars. They made them more Star Wars relevant in that kind of way. So they dial it back here and they ramp up the Star Wars element. And again, it's a very subtle utility belts or whatever it might be, just to make sure that it works. And how they piece together the animals, right? Well, like a little of this animal, a little of that one, kind of mix them all together. And it's just, that's how Star Wars is made, right? I mean, this is just how we do Star Wars. It's kit bashing, but with animals in that kind of regard. So it was just really cool to have these sound elements, the visual elements all come together into an amazing story. And then I'm kind of a sucker for brother-sister stuff and for father-daughter type of stories, which of course these were all in spades, for the series here, for these last few. And so to have those elements and to have that connection with brother and sister, and again, the idea of having to let go, but in a very different way than what we've seen in some of the other episodes in Visions Volume 2, was a really great blend and a great contrast to what we had in some of the other ones. But man, the animation, again, it's really 3D, but also just the style of it, totally unique in its own way, and really, really enjoyed this one a lot.
Yeah, same thing. And I just want to kind of maybe punch a couple of things a little bit harder because I really enjoyed him. And starting with the Gotal. So the number of Gotals in this episode was like vastly exceeded my expectations. In fact, I think it is the only one from Visions. There might have been one in season 1 that had a Gotal, but this one had at least 2 of them. If it was not, it was the same one, but I was pretty excited about that. But all joking aside, I want to talk about the colors because this was, again, going back to the filmmaker focus, right? The little behind the scenes thing that they show that you can go watch. And again, I encourage everybody to go watch these. They're just as good, if not better, than the episodes themselves, because it just gives you that additional context and gets you to see where it's coming from. But the super saturated colors in this one, and like they were very rich. It had the music, even just the background, like the background detail in this one, the smallest little emblems and marks and all that stuff that you don't even pay attention until you pause it. There was one just in particular that I didn't even catch till today in, I don't know, viewing number 4 or 5, whatever it was I went through. But when they're on the train, when they show, there's a lot going on with the train sequence because it's a battle. You've got speeder bikes and you got the horse things, the rebels and all this stuff going on. But if you look at the background of the train itself, through the window, you can see all the people in the train and they're reacting, even though they're opaque because of the glass. Right. You can see them interacting and reacting with each other to what's happening outside of the train. So just the level of like attention to detail they went through in this episode itself was just phenomenal. It just feels like every time you watch, you're like, whoa, look at that little marking or look at that little symbol that's there. Or when you get to the market scene, I mean, it's right up there, in my opinion, with like the Pixars and that stuff when you get into these incredibly rich, detailed environments, but yet it feels very subtle. It's not so in your face in that regard. I love also like the flute, the symbolism of, some symbolism there, I guess, with their father. Right. The take on the Jigoris as being like the rebels themselves. I was like, oh, this is so cool. Like these are the rebels. And, it reminded me a lot of, we've had a lot of trains in Star Wars here as of late. And I say as of late in the last 5 years since Disney came in. It feels like we get a train once a year in some episode of whatever television series is going on.
Starting with Solo, it seemed like,
yeah, they kind of started the trend. But I enjoyed it. I really loved that whole aspect of it, and that whole sequence was really pretty phenomenal as well. So,
well, even like a callback to like Phantom Menace too, with the Tuskens taking pot shots at the pod racers, right? Yeah. Just camped out on the ridge.
Yep.
So again, I just love that seamless transition from all these other pieces of content that just fit so well when you're going through a valley here or what was this, like a canyon, I guess.
Yeah, more of a canyon,
Right.
crevasse. So we kind of skipped over a couple of things. So I want to just backtrack a second. So the synopsis is: fleeing from their village by train and pursued by ferocious imperial forces, a boy and his force-sensitive younger sister seek refuge in a vibrant and dangerous daba. And that daba, I didn't know what it was. Honestly, I went and did the research. They talked about it in the Filmmaker Focus as well, but it's basically a roadside restaurant. The idea is it's almost like a truck stop, right, where you pull in off to the side and they've got this outside kind of eatery, if you will, which I thought was cool. Because again, this is the Indian culture influence coming into all of this. But to think that they would pull that up, and it feels like, again, natural. It feels like this is something that would exist in Star Wars, even though it's completely rooted in our own real world. This was brought to us by 88 Pictures, Indian studios, as you would expect out of Mumbai, and written and directed by Ishan Shukla, who was on that feature the Filmmaker Focus. It was really interesting to kind of see his kind of thoughts and all that behind it. But yeah, again, something steeped in a lot of the culture, like we said. I think they even talked about a little bit later with the Inquisitor. They were kind of conjuring some of the Indian lore. What was it? It was like it wasn't like a deity, but there was it was some evil presence or
exactly. But I like the comment though about it, like with how they dressed the Inquisitor, because I thought the design of the Inquisitor was so great. It was very Inquisitor like, but it was also just a step above. And they were like, Indian culture is a little bit, it's a little out there sometimes. It's a little
over the top. He said it's nothing simple. Everything was complex, is what he said, I think.
Right. Yeah. Everything's complex. And I just love that because it is just a step and a tier above. When you look at even like the Jedi, right? When you look at how she's dressed and how he described that with the culture of where that was inspired from. And it is just more elaborate. And it's very exquisite and very awe-inspiring in a lot of ways. And so to be able to have that with each individual character, at least these primary characters at the very least, was just really, it was just really amazing to see that front and center. But it really I think it brought something really unique to the Inquisitor, though, that just took it to a different level. It wasn't just the straight black with the mask or whatever, the different iterations we've seen where they're pretty bland and pretty uninspiring. This one actually felt inspired, and it felt like it was almost like a regalness to the Inquisitor of sorts. And then when you couple that with the voice acting that they had for the American version, which is absolutely spot on, it just fits so well.
Did they have a non-English track for this one?
I did not listen to any of the non-English tracks this time around.
I should have. Yeah, shame on us for not doing that. Wow. But that would have been interesting to have they done that. Usually they mention it in the Filmmaker Focus, but I didn't hear them say that, so I'm assuming they did not do that.
Yeah, and these they only talked about dialect, I think, one time, and that was with the South African studio. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. So yeah, I mean, a lot of great moments in this. I know we've kind of already. I really enjoyed, like you brought this up, but I do kind of just want to reemphasize the brother-sister relationship between Rani and Charuk. I mean, it's so good, and a lot of it is credit to the actresses and the actor and actresses. Suraj Sharma is Charuk, the bandit. He's on there. There's a really cool thing where he's talking about how he's an older brother, and so he's constantly, taking care of his kids. And if you're any sibling, it feels like at some point, especially the older ones, you kind of know exactly where he's coming from in that regard. But it was a very sweet relationship, and to have somebody that was like his character, that was not force sensitive, didn't have a dog in this race kind of thing, and yet he's got his sister there trying to protect her. I mean, it was all very, again, steeped in Star Wars, but it still stood on its own. I think a lot of it is credited to the actors and the actresses, but I did enjoy that relationship of them traveling through, their journey, although it's compressed in like 15 minutes. I mean, this could have been a full-length kind of feature, and it feels like they could have come back, and they can still come back, and there's a lot more story here to tell, as we said with some of the other ones. I want to go back, let's talk about the train sequence. Because there's so much going on in here. There's so many different levels. There's a lot of action. There's comedy at one point in this one as well, right? I think where he finally sees the speeder bike show up, and he's like, "This all for sweets?" Like he's thinking all he did was steal a couple of lollipops, and my goodness, the stormtroopers just showed up. But man, when those Tungars, like the horses that they were riding on, like I was like, man, this design is actually really cool. It was cool to see that they had kind of went through a couple different iterations before they landed on that one, but. I was getting, for whatever reason, flashbacks of the High Republic, when I remember, I forget what book it was. It might have been The Rising Storm, when they were on these like bipedal or quad whatever they were, horse-like creatures. I forget the names of them at the time, but there was some shades of that were kind of happening in there too. So
yeah, Porter Engel and Loden Greatstorm and Bell, I think
they were chasing after the.
Yeah, and also very like Indiana Jones like in some ways too. But anything that you and I grew up with horses and trains and horses and buggies or whatever it might have been, it felt very inspired. I love the game though between the two characters though. I love the bandits in pursuit of sweets and plunder, the bandits ride for feast and wonder. Mm-hmm. It's just so, not only is it like poetic, but it's just fun and juvenile in the best kind of way, and like this innocence, this innocent fun. But it's something that they were able to use to distract one another from the seriousness of what was going on, and to be able to pull his sister from, I don't want to say a dark place, but from, getting down and being, feeling like the weight was starting to get onto her, and worrying about their father, who was left at the camp. Of course, I didn't catch this the first time around, but, her father's probably dead. They burned the town, and that was what the Inquisitor was talking about. I don't know why it took me a whole second viewing to catch all that, but I just love the innocence of it though, and that they were able to come back to that at the end of the episode and finish that way, and to have that moment of bright levity, but also show that letting go and giving someone an opportunity can also be a positive thing. It can also be an inspiring type of thing for Charuk as well. Mm-hmm. Even though she was very sad, kind of going out on her own, there was a certain uplift to it, especially with the flute coming back and something to remind him, and also take her youthful enthusiasm and spirit with him with the flute.
Speaking of the flute, or I guess kind of segue into the music, this music was very heavy-handed in terms of sounding like something straight out of Indian culture. There was,
the bard was like one of my favorite things, like the four-arm bard playing the drum and the whatever.
Oh yeah, they said he had a tail too, so there was he had 5 instruments going on there.
Yeah, I think the tail was what was beating the drum in the back or something like that.
Right.
Yeah, it was so much fun. I loved it.
Yeah, but it was unapologetically kind of Indian music, but yet it still worked. Like there were, especially the fight scene between the Inquisitor and what was the woman's name? Vitra?
No, Rugal.
Yeah, Rugal or Rugal.
Yeah, Vitra was the Inquisitor, I believe.
Yeah, that's right. So and I actually had his notes. It's the Nava. Nava in Indian mythology is who that character was based on. So, but either way, so when Rugal and the Sith Inquisitor were fighting, that music sequence was, it felt appropriate. It just worked. I don't know what it was. It didn't sound like John Williams. It didn't sound like Kevin Kiner or anybody else, but it certainly worked for me. I was all into it. I really enjoyed that.
What I love about it though is that the fighting itself, sorry to interrupt, the fighting itself was very inspired. It felt much like the Palpatine, Savage Opress, Darth Maul fight, just the energy, the quickness of it, the smoothness of the animation, just the intensity of it was just very fast moving, but also in the right kind of ways. And so it felt very intense, and it really captured that spirit of what we would have in it, I think specifically in the Clone Wars. Yeah.
What did you think about the slow motion sequence that happened there?
It was very different, but actually I really liked it because it was like, what is happening here? Especially with the troopers kind of falling. And again, I kind of like the idea of it though, that this is almost like the vision of a Force user of what is all going on during all of these explosions or things getting moved around. Whether or not they're using the Force to create some of this is maybe debatable. The sandstorm starting to come in as well, but I liked it because it was almost the perspective of the Inquisitor and the Jedi of what was happening all around them, so that they could see it all happening before they actually engaged, and then you get the real spirited part of the fight.
Yeah. No, I actually enjoyed it quite a bit too. It was a little weird at first because what is happening? This is very different, but it seemed to work. There was some really, and it actually had there were again moments of levity or brevity, I should say, in this one as well. Like if you let very first sequence in the slow motion, or if not the second sequence, those two guys that were fighting the Ugnaught and that other creature, he's actually taking a punch at him. And then just to kind of bring this one up too, like when all the trays fall, they cut over real quickly, and that guy takes a shot at the Ugnaught, thinking he's the one that did this.
Right.
Just that
they kept standing right in front of him, and you better.
I know, but it's
shot.
just it's a cheap shot. But yeah, there's definitely more going on here than just that moment. Like there's some deep rooted history here between these two guys that we'll never know. But
can I tell you how loudly I cheered with the helicopter blade though? When he did it, it was so subtle. but it worked so well because it wasn't as over the top as what we had in Rebels.
Yeah, where they're just like flying like Apocalypse Now.
Exactly.
Kind of
But in this case, it really felt very natural. And the way that they did it was, okay, this is how this could actually work. Like this actually works really well, and it doesn't take you out of the moment where you're like, how the hell are they flying with lightsabers? That makes no sense. There's no aerodynamic or none of that stuff. This one was just very much using the Force to twirl, and it was more the natural effect of it, although you could definitely see a bit of a lift. I just thought it was a masterful way of integrating that into the Inquisitor, but not doing it was very subtle, and it did not go over the top in that way. I thought it was absolutely perfectly done.
Yeah. And who was the voice actor? I don't know who played Vitra, it was Niraj Kabi is the Inquisitor. That's who it is.
Right.
But his voice just alone was so menacing. I really liked it. And it sounded like when he first comes in, what's his line? He says, "Imagine that, a Jedi in Golak." Or no, he said, "Did we miss something?" That's what it was.
Right, did we miss something?
Yeah, you hear that in the background, and everybody kind of looks around. The music stops. It's kind of like, the cantina. All the music suddenly comes to a stop because the big bad just walked in. But I have to say, like his presence, his design, the green face with the eyebrows, the way they animated him, the way the character gave him life, or the actor gave the character life with the line deliveries, it was really good. Like this was one of the better Inquisitors I think we've ever had in Star Wars. And he doesn't look like the normal Inquisitor at all, which is A-okay with me. So,
yeah, they nailed it. They nailed it out of the park. I just absolutely love it. And I love this episode in general was kind of a mirror, an opposite mirror of Screecher's Reach, which of course we loved in a very different way, right? So where you had the character going with the Sith mother in that way, this time we have going with the Jedi, and but there's still that sadness and that a bit of that fear. But you have this hope in this episode, so it has a slightly different spin on it. But again, I love the parallels between some of this, and Ao's song had a little bit of this as well. But
yeah,
I just love that. I love that even though these were all developed completely separate of one another. I don't know if you noticed, but some of the animated slides on some of these episodes we're going to talk about tonight are all like 2020, 2021, by the way, just to show you how long it takes to develop this stuff or when they start.
Yeah.
But I just like that we have these parallels between, just like we have with the Kyber crystals in the next two. There's some things to help connect them, even though they're all independently made, and really absolutely no synergies between them were intended at all or intentional. Yeah.
Yeah. Just to quickly kind of touch on the ending. By the way, we didn't talk about the Rugal's character when she pulled it. I mean, we saw it in the trailer, I think.
Coolest way to tied a lightsaber? I mean, kind of thinking, yeah, probably.
Yeah. I mean, was it... what's the other character's name? The old Jedi dude that we've got right now. Oh God, drawing a blank on his name now. It's not Syndulla. I'm drawing a blank. But we've got a Jedi that's got a cane now that pulls out into a lightsaber.
Okay.
But
it reminds me the Ronin has has the sheath, right? From the duel, of course. So a little bit different take on it there. But just a cool way of hiding a double lightsaber within a cane. It just aesthetically looked amazing. Yeah,
I was trying to pull up the character's name because I'm not going to sleep tonight unless I get this out of my Terra Sinube. I was all over the place, but yeah, Terra Sinube's got the same thing where he pulls it out. We've seen him in we saw him in Clone Wars, of course. But either way, the other cool thing about it was when she pulls it out. It was like Ahsoka, almost like when she pulls out her blades together, right? That same kind of a movement, although she's not doing that. She's just pulling it apart and igniting at the same time. Like how showboat is that? But that was a great moment. I want to know more about the Jedi Temple too. This like temple that's built underwater, right? Yeah. That seems to be on the truck stop is just a front, really, for this Jedi Temple that's underground here. And the whole part of it, like the whole scene with the water, and lifting and separating, her going down, closing up. You think, God, where are they going? What does that look like? And I want to touch on just quickly something before we get to the next one. But this idea has been visited now in the 3 episodes that you mentioned. I think we had some of it in Visions Volume 1. But the idea that, kids are leaving at a very young age with Jedi who can help them and train them and make, be better use of their powers so they don't become a menace to society, literally sometimes.
Right.
How do you feel like they've tackled all of this? Like, it seems to be like no one, with the exception of Screecher's Reach, really dabbled into is this right? Ethically, is this the right thing to do? I'm not saying they need to go there, but how do you feel about the takes on all 3 of those?
Actually, I think the way that Ao's song did it was probably my favorite of the bunch. I think it made the most sense, right?
Yeah.
You hear the call, do you answer it? Right? It's your decision to do what you feel is best. And it's a choice, right? And it's in your hands, and you kind of look to those around you for a little bit of guidance, but you have to follow what's in your heart, what's in your spirit. And are you brave enough to tackle something that feels really uncomfortable, knowing that it could be for something much bigger or much better than what you're capable of doing? So if I looked at the entire landscape of Visions and who handled it, I think the most consistent with how I would probably view, I think, the intent of the Jedi, it's probably more that one. This one did a good job too, but I think also the argument was very sound, though, from Rugal, because we know that Charok wasn't going to continue to be able to keep her safe.
Mm-hmm.
They were going to be on the run. There would be more Inquisitors. It was better off for both of them, for her to go with people of her own kind, so to speak, learn to control her abilities, learn to protect herself, safety in numbers a bit of with her kind, but also the safety for Charok as well, so that he wouldn't be hunted. And if something did happen to him, then she would be captured, or vice versa, that he would be killed. So it was better off for both of them, even though it's sad the way that it goes. I think this is the thing that's difficult for us to understand, is that when you have someone who with exceptional abilities, what is the right answer, especially if you're being hunted? And I think this is a unique situation. It's not the same as when the Jedi steal babies from, when the Jedi Order was around,
Right.
being
Yeah.
kidding, of course. But in this era where the Jedi Order 66 has already happened, and now you're in hiding and you're underground. So very different scenarios in that case. But I think in this case, it does make sense for how they handled this one.
Okay. Well, with that, we're going to move on to. Sorry, I don't know what's going on tonight. Let's see. All right. Well, let's talk about. We'll move on to the next one, which is The Pit.
Right.
Now, first off, when the title screen comes up and I see Lucasfilm Ltd. the first time, until I watched the filmmaker focus, I had no idea what the heck was going on here. Why was Lucasfilm being named on the title along with the Dart? I don't even know how to say that. Studio.
Yeah, D.
I think is what it's.
Yeah, DR. Yeah.
The art, whatever. I'm sorry.
Well,
I don't mean to be disrespectful. I just don't know how to pronounce it.
Yeah, and at the very end, they were thanking Dave Filoni and Rain Johnson as well, right? I'm like, why are they thanking these people?
Yeah.
Like, that's
Right.
weird. None of the other ones have done this. This is so uniquely different.
So, and we'll get into that here in a little bit. But let's see. The blurb on this one is: a fearless young prisoner forced to dig for Kyber by the Empire plans a risky escape for he and his people. This was written and directed by somebody I'd never heard of, someone named Leandre Thomas, and I think we all know him now, especially if you watch that filmmaker focus. And this one had a kind of an all-star cast, if you will. Like, it was very different. They had David Diggs, who's hugely popular for all kinds of stuff right now. I think Hamilton, and a number of other things that he's kind of living his best life, if you will, at this point. But we also had Steve Bloom is back in this one as well. We had Matthew Wood coming back, Cedric Yarbrough, who I don't know. I only know him from Reno 911. He's a credible actor. He's been in so many different things, but to have him in this as well. And then to kind of top it off, we had Anika Noni Rose, who was Tiara. What was her name? Not Tiara.
She was the mother. Yeah. Oh, gosh. Eureka.
No, she was in
Eureka.
The Frog and the Princess. Yeah, but she was in The Frog and the Princess as Tatiana. Or is it Tatiana? I think that's what her name is. The Princess from Frog and the Princess, which is incredible Disney animated 2D. It's like the last one I think they did. Just go watch it. It's absolutely, if you're not crying by the end of it, there's something wrong with you. But to hear her voice again, she's got such a distinct voice. But it had a pretty good, pretty all-star cast. And again, all these things are popping up, and I'm thinking, what's the origin there? Like, why does this one feel so different about it all? And to kind of summarize, it's essentially somebody in Lucasfilm who was the manager of, video and audio assets.
Right.
That was his title. And I'm not making slight of what he does. I'm just saying
the everyday people have ideas too, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And you get to see in that feature focus, it was kind of the process that he went through to kind of pitch this idea that he had, and how it just kind of started rising up, gaining interest, gaining momentum, gaining support within Lucasfilm. I mean, at the end of the day, he had, Dave Filoni signing off on it. He had, everybody that's part of Visions. Yeah, I mean, it ended with Kathleen Kennedy saying, "Yeah, let's go for it, let's do it." But when you talk about someone who just went from an idea and a premise to having his dream come to life on screen. And the way this happened was they needed an art studio to he had the story, they needed an art studio, and so that's how the two Lucasfilm plus D Art Studio kind of came together through all of that. But so that's the background. But what did you think of this? What do you think about the story, and what were some of the highlights for you?
I like it. I love this blend of East and West because while you have a very Western type of story, you had very Eastern elements visually creeping into it. So it was a really cool, and you have to get all the backstory in order to really comprehend some of that and understand it really well, or at least to appreciate it, I think, better. At least that's what it took for me. But I love that visual, dynamic between it. I like the idea of digging for Kyber. I wasn't really sure what they were doing, but I like that how they were doing that. I love some of the sound elements of this. When Crux is climbing out of the pit, it's just drums and it's echo, and you feel it's just building this intensity, and it's building the drama and building the suspense. You actually feel how much is riding on this in that moment. And for the entire episode, that's probably my favorite scene, was him getting out, and just the way that it makes you feel. You actually feel yourself tensing up a little bit as he's getting out, because you're like, no, if he falls, that's kind of it. And I mean, and actually at the end when they threw him in, I was like, no way.
Oh, that was shocking.
I was like, okay, well, he's gonna be hurt or whatever. I was like, no, he's dead. I mean, he's gone, Jim. He's like Mace Windu, not coming back. So, I mean, but I like those. I like that element about it a lot. The other really cool thing, and I didn't notice this the first time around, but the second time around I did, is the time lapse whenever they're showing the pit in the way that it gets getting deeper and the city is growing.
Building up.
It's called Crystal City. But what's interesting, in the pit, you slowly start to see the paths that take you to the surface eroding and going away till it's smooth. So it was all part of the plan, right? To leave them in there, of course. I mean, that part's obvious, but you're like, why didn't they just climb? How did they not get out the entire time, right? Well, it's because they had those paths and they were just slowly chipping away at them as they went.
Wow.
So it's a little towards the end of it. It's very subtle. It's not every frame it's getting smaller, but it's just kind of towards the last several frames there. Again, just subtle elements like that really did add to that story. But man, yeah, the climb out of the pit was my absolute favorite part of this episode. Overall, it wasn't one of my favorite episodes. I loved the story. I love kind of what they were doing with it. It just it didn't hit me as hard as some of the other ones, but there were certain elements of this absolutely, thoroughly enjoyed it though.
Yeah, and you talked about the sound for this particular episode. I'm not sure if you know, but there is a little small indie sound studio called Skywalker Sound. They were involved in this as well.
Sounds familiar. That's kind of a catchy name. They should do something with that.
They should do something with it, right? No, in all seriousness, they were. I mean, this guy had like all of Skywalker Sound and ILM basically at his disposal. So, and not taking anything away from the story, because I think the story was spot on. It was amazing. It was just what a benefit to have, all that technology and all that expertise and experience behind you, as well as you're trying to bring this vision to life. No pun intended. But
it's really cool to have a story without lightsabers, or really a story without the Force. I mean, and it still feel very rooted in just the reality of what the galaxy is in this moment. I like that realism aspect of this too. And of course, the messaging behind it was, of course, very clear as well. But I do like that we didn't have it all focused on Force and Jedi and everything else, because we don't always get a lot of that, because even when we get it, it kind of comes back to the Force and Jedi in some ways, it seems. So,
yeah, well, it's Star Wars, but it doesn't. But you're right, it doesn't have to. Although at the very end, I kind of took that as the Kyber crystal, like calling out to her, attuning to her.
Oh,
way
absolutely.
It kind of came to life. So
yeah, I mean, so it, like most of them, it kind of gets back to that, right?
It does, but it wasn't the primary focus at all. Like
Right,
it was
exactly.
not about Jedi. It wasn't light and dark side. It was about good and evil, and that was pretty clear, pretty apparent.
Yeah, and the goodness within people, I think, was most important, of course.
Yep. Yeah, I forget who it was. It might have been, actually, I think it was Leandre who said this, but he was talking about the analogy of how they were forced to work for other people, and as they did, they sunk lower and lower, right? That symbolism that was there with
While
them kind of
others
sinking
rose
in.
higher and higher in the city, right?
Yeah. So, and I agree. Like the storyline, I thought it was really great. The premise of the story was really good. Was it my favorite of the series? No, probably not. There were no real reason. It's just there wasn't. I even said it in my notes. I said it's kind of a simple story in all seriousness, right? There was the aspect of, family still in here. That was nice, especially with the little girl. What was her name again? Livy? Her
Livy,
name?
right.
Yeah. Did enjoy that. We got to see her mom, and it wasn't clear to me, were they related? Was Livy and Crux related, or was it just some kid that she was close to? They never kind of explained that, I guess, huh?
Yeah, they didn't explain it, and they didn't explain it in the bind. In the filmmaker focus, yeah, they did not explain it there either.
Yeah. But that idea that everyone, and I'm quoting here from the episode, everyone has an inner light. No matter how dark, it's always there to guide you the right way. It lives in all of us. It's so central to Star Wars, and Darth Vader is probably the one that comes to mind the most, or right away. Same thing with Ben Solo, Kylo Ren. Coming back from the darkness is really what this is about.
But it's also the message of Luke, too, of believing in others that they have it within them, which I thought was really powerful.
Yeah. What was I going to say?
I'm sorry.
No, you're good. You're good. So I don't remember. The opulence of the city was interesting, too. When Crux finally makes his way out and gets into the city, and you see how well off all these people are, and yet they don't live that far away. I mean, relatively speaking, they don't live... that town isn't that far away from the pit itself. And maybe some of that was done for, stylistically, so that we could just see the two, happening, growing and not growing together. But the idea that they were just so, living their own lives and not really aware, like they weren't bad people. They just didn't know that was going on. And when they did find out that was what was happening, Crux delivered his message, although it came to a horrible end. They took action, right? They rose up. Even the people that were living in such opulence decided to kind of go do something about it, and they're ultimately the ones that kind of freed them. So I did enjoy that part of it too. That inner light was there for all those people, even though they almost portrayed them as being, high and mighty, not giving a care, very aware and very conscious of the fact that these people were digging and making lives for them so that they could live that kind of a life. But I was not expecting them to throw the body back in there. Like, that was pretty dark for just Star Wars in general. But, in Visions especially, and to you, like you said, when they threw him in there, I thought, well, how did he survive that? Like, how are they going to explain this? And, next thing over, they're putting a sheet over him. Like, oh, well, I guess he didn't survive that. And that probably makes sense given how high that fall was. But, his sacrifice meant something. It inspired others to do even more, at least Livy to do more, which is, calling out and doing the whole follow the light kind of chant there, that little mantra they had that really got the attention of the citizens. So all in all, I think I really enjoyed this one. Probably not as much as some of the other ones. On the animation front, it had everything that I like about Japanese animation and English. I felt like they did a good blend of that. And I want to, again, credit to, I can't believe I can't say this, D'Art Shutagio, I think is how you say that, right?
Yep, that sounds right.
So that's the studio. And that was in the filmmaker focus. They kind of talked about how that was their forte. They were uniquely positioned to be the art studio to deliver this story, given they were essentially a blend of Japanese animation, traditional U.S. animation. He's like the first black anime owner, whatever, creator that lives in Japan with a Japanese studio. It's kind of a big deal if you think about it. But so, yeah, I mean, I love the animation itself. I thought it was really interesting. And there were moments in there where I was watching and I was like, wow, they took all the best elements, honestly, that in my opinion of Japanese animation and all the best elements of what I think American animation does really well. And they just kind of blend those together. There's that very last scene when Livy's she's in the shuttle, I think. And there's like that sunset that's happening. Right. I think that's like that shot itself. It looks like those two worlds kind of coming together, and especially when they kind of do that close-up shot of the kyber crystal and the way her eyes light up, because it's calling to her, similar to what we saw in The Gathering. But
yeah,
yeah.
And I like the touch at the end. I do like that the crystal turns blue. I mean, this is something that we know that the crystal attunes to someone based on, it changes the color based on who they are. That's still kind of the canon I adhere to for the most part. You're called to the crystal, and it presents what color it is based on your inner light, if you will. Yep. So I like that connection was made, and that we saw something like that. It was a unique spin I wasn't expecting.
Okay, and lastly, let's talk about Ao's song, which is by Triggerfish. So these guys are out of South Africa. I think they were in Cape Town, if I saw that correctly.
Correct. Yep.
Yeah, but the elevator pitch on this one is: an alien child who longs to sing is praised by her loving but stern father to stay quiet because of the calamitous effect her voice has on the crystals in the nearby mines. So again, this is a story. It's another interesting take on, we have kyber crystals. We have, somebody that's force sensitive, the Jedi coming in. A lot of the elements that we've seen in many of the Vision episodes, both in Volume 1 and Volume 2. I was interesting that, do you think there's anything in how they pick the order of these episodes? Like, they landed on this one as kind of like the anchor, the final one. And I liked it. It wasn't my favorite, though. And I wouldn't say Visions 2 was kind of a letdown for me the way it ended at all. I thought it was solid, throughout. But it was an interesting choice for me. I felt like that they picked this one to land on, given, maybe the animations, the art style, right? Well, we talked about Journeys to the Dark Head as kind of being the most steeped in Star Wars lore. It felt probably the most Star Warsy of all of them. Why wouldn't you end with that one versus something like Ao's Song?
How they picked them is an interesting question. It would be interesting to hear James Waugh talk about some of that, of how they order these. The way I view it is they ended on a very uplifting note. So ending on a very upbeat, uplifting, very positive note, I think is also something that probably was important to them to go ahead and end the series on, or end the volume on. So while none of them are directly connected in that kind of way, it does feel, it is probably the most spiritually uplifting at the end, where you feel like everyone is moving in the direction they're supposed to move, and you feel good about it, right? And the music is very inspiring. It's very bright. Everything is really bright. Everything is, the crystals are shining. The ship goes off into space, and scene kind of thing, right? And so it feels like a nice wrap on the season in a very positive note that maybe the other ones would have been like, wow, that was cool, way to end it. But if you want to inspire, and again, visions in general, just to take the word more literally, a positive vision, or that positive jumping off point into Volume 3 eventually. I kind of like this one as an end, because again, it's kind of a dark horse too. It's like when you listen to an album, you get a new album, and you're going through, and the top hits, the one you're going to expect to hear on the radio, are those first, 1, 3, 4, 5, right? It's always in that first half.
Yep.
But it's those 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 tracks. Like, every once in a while you find a hidden gem in there that are really good. And
deep
for
tracks.
me, yeah, like the deep cuts, right? But you're like, man, it's just such a great track. And you find other people are like, you know what? Yeah, I really love that. To me, this is kind of one of those episodes. This was something, the more I watched it, the further up, when you made me rank this, because you're a big giant jerk face, as we established at the beginning, this one kept creeping up my list, when originally I was like, oh, this is probably going to be at the very bottom. And no, it is nowhere near the bottom now. And so it was just, again, the father-daughter element of it. I love the idea of the Sith crystals. I love the story that they set up with it as well, with the text. I think that was a unique way of using the text. We don't really get much of that in Star Wars without a crawl, but kind of the establishing of that. So I like that. I like that we ended on this very upbeat note.
Yeah. I can see that. I can see where this was there was really nothing negative about this at all. In fact, there was really no even, outside of the instability that her voice suddenly would bring, as part of the process, I guess is how I assume that kind of happened. There was really there was no Sith here. There was never the dark side presence that already had happened. That already established that as part of, like you said, the crawl that's not a crawl, which if you think about it, like if you put there's 3 paragraphs, and they could have easily just made them a crawl. They did not, which I think it makes sense. I mean, it was probably the right approach, but I was like, hey, it's a crawl, but it's not a crawl.
But I do like that you still have that menace, though, of the crystals, and the way that they use the audio tracks and the different voices, because they had like cries and shrieks and screams and growls and pain, right?
Right.
And after the soothing song, you're like, oh, this is going well, and all of a sudden it all falls apart, and it just gets angry. So you get that tension, you get that release. I think the other maybe negative side of things is the whole Frozen type of story, right? You have someone with powers, you want to protect them. So what do? You tell them to restrain their powers, hide it. Conceal, don't feel kind of thing, right? From Frozen. It felt very similar of that, but I love that challenge of like, well, yeah, you want your kids to be themselves, but you have this parental duty to love and protect them, right? In the best way that you know how. And sometimes you just don't know how, especially if you don't understand what they're fully capable of, which is why I think this story plays better for the child going away with the Jedi. It makes a lot more sense in that capacity for this story than it does in some of the other ones.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. And I do like the way they handled this one a little bit better. I mean, she's a little bit older. Conditions are different too, right? They're not under war. It's not. I didn't get this one as being during post Order 66. So maybe before that?
This one's a bit ambiguous, as to the story. But it seems like before the prequels, maybe High Republic type of era. Kind of.
I can see High Republic.
This felt like a High Republic kind of story, actually.
Right. No, I could go there with that. So yeah, it is. It's a different situation, and it is because she is older. It makes sense to allow her to kind of have free will in free agency in deciding whether or not she wants to stay or go with them. And I like that they gave her a fortnight, which I always have to look that up because as a stupid American, I can't remember what fortnight means. It's it's 2 weeks, but they at least gave her some time to think about it. Where in most stories, the Jedi show up and it's like, hey, sorry, we got to take your kid. You don't have a choice in the matter.
Be back at sunrise.
Yeah.
Think on it.
Yeah, think on it. And we're still not going to give you a choice. But a little bit different take on that. They gave her some time, and it felt good because it felt like both her and her father had gotten used to the idea or got on board with the idea that she was going to go. There was a beautiful line, and it's not from the story. I think it comes back in the filmmaker's focus where, who was it? I think it was the creator who said this. I'm trying to go back to, I want to say quickly, it was written and directed by Daniel Clark and Nadia Daries, I think is her name. But I think, and I'm going to paraphrase, but he said that her destiny was not in the rocks; it was in the stars, right?
Yeah,
Yeah. So that idea of it all was really great. I mean, I love the fact that she had a choice in all this, and certainly the way it ended. The more I think about it too. Now we said the High Republic era, the fact that she was singing through the Force, it reminded me a lot of like Avar Kriss and how the Force is interpreted in different ways, and then it comes across to different people. We don't get a lot of that, of course, in the prequel trilogy and original trilogy, or even beyond, because at that point, things have happened. But I did enjoy that particular aspect of it as well. Let's see. I want to talk quickly about the animation style, because I thought this was especially when in the filmmaker focus, they showed how they created the puppets, the little models. They were handmade, so they could kind of see all the textures and all the wear and tear on the pouches and stuff that they were wearing.
The fuzz of the felt, even, yeah.
Yeah, and how the wind affected all that. But I mean, if I watched this, I thought this was I thought it was like real, like it was just stop motion animation type stuff, and it was not. It was all 3D rendered, but they did a really good job of making that stuff just jump off the screen as real textures that you could reach down and just kind of grab these things. And even the landscape and all of the background, the intricate detail of all the flowers and the crevices on the walls. And I think it was all inspired from Cape Town itself, some mountain or spire out there in Cape Town. But man, they did an incredible job. Again, no stone left unturned, no pun intended, with the amount of detail that went into designing the backgrounds and the characters on this one.
You're right. It was visually stunning, and it just felt like you could reach out and touch it. And that was definitely all intentional. They wanted to inspire. Well, they were inspired by the landscape of what they live in. They wanted to do it justice too, to truly show you the beauty of that landscape and have it really be true to life and feel like you are there in that environment. And this is what all of the episodes have done a really great job of in some way, is they brought only their own culture, but their own way of they're all of their individual experiences and in some of them direct environments as well. Like we saw this with like the Spy Dancer, right? And some of it, how that was all inspired too, with France and Paris in particular. So I like that we get those elements that do work into the actual visual creative process. It's not just the culture, it's not just the things that we say and do, but visually all of this. But you're right, man. It was so lifelike. It was so visually saturating in the puppetry that this is usually something you would see like on a Disney Junior or something like that, or a Nickelodeon.
Oh, that's a good
right?
point. Yeah. No, you're right.
That's the type of characterization you have of the dolls. I'll just use the word dolls for lack of a better word right now, even though it's 3D animation. That's usually kind of what you would see, right? But in this one, it just felt a little bit different. And I think it was really just the backdrop of everything around it was just so stunning and so powerful. And I love that even the framing shot at the very beginning, with the rocks in the spire, create the shape of a kyber crystal in between the spires. It was so, I mean, it was, I'll call it subtle. It was definitely intentional and obvious, but it still felt very subtle. It wasn't as on the nose as some others would be. It just felt like a really establishing, inspiring shot, and then when you look at it, you're like, okay, that's a kyber, especially when you figure out what they're doing, right?
Yep. And this one, it felt like they did a really good job of coming up with a whole backstory. All of them have done this, I know, and I think offline we talked about. I think you had sent me something, and they were talking about, what was it? Was it Journey to the Darkhead that they had come up with this whole backstory?
They have a whole actual, probably hour and a half long type of thing. They've built it all out. Yeah.
And you can see elements of that in this one in particular because of the crawl or the opening title sequence, right? And this whole story that they'd spun up about this Sith that had come in and converted all the kyber crystal, poisoned it.
How cool is that?
I know. It's like, I want to see what that story is. Like, that world building is definitely in here. So kudos to them for coming up with all of that. And I think it certainly, I mean, they don't have to go do all of that, but it becomes much easier and they become more invested in the storytelling when they know the background and have those certain elements and aspects of what happened, what came before. So I think it enriches the story in a lot of ways. But the greedy part of me is like, hey, I'd love to see this again. Another one of these turned into, I want to know more about this place, or make it canon and give us cameos or whatever else. Find a way to weave these characters or these storylines, or even just make mention of what's happening in something else. So it just kind of, brings it to the forelight again.
I mean, how cool is it when they have the freedom, the creative freedom to be able to go create a planet and create a whole scenario? This is the cool thing about Star Wars. It's so vast with the galaxy and so many places that we exist, but we don't know. And I think this is where kybers aren't just on Ilum. Mm-hmm. And the crystals can be in other places. Yeah. Yeah, whether or not they're concentrated or not is a little bit different, but this planet is just so steeped with it. It's like, wow, that's really cool. And your mind just goes in just various ways of excitement of saying, wow, the Sith saw this as such a threat that they went and corrupted the entire planet. Like, how the hell did they actually make that happen? Mm-hmm. Like, I mean, you're thinking like Lord Momin type of stuff, right? Where you're actually able to project your entire presence onto an entire area. Or I'm sure there was another Sith character I can't think of that was that kind of powerful. You've probably mentioned them in the past, but just that idea of like, how is that possible? And that the Jedi would have to chip away at this so slowly, in practice and reality, unless you just have this once in a generation type of person or being come around that has this unique capability of being able to purify it in mass and give them the release and the cleanse. And again, I love you were talking about the synergies of this story with some of the things we have in canon. Very much with Ahsoka too, like the crystals calling to her, basically talking to her, singing to her, much like Avar Kriss interpretation of the Force. Mm-hmm. But I love that connection with the kyber crystals, even though it's all of them in a certain way. But I do love that connection too with Ahsoka, with not only the purification, but just the hearing them sing and the hearing the pain, feeling it. And she's just, her natural inclination is to be able to help release all of that for them.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, great episode. I was very, very pleasantly surprised with this one, especially the way it ended, and then going back to the feature filmmaker focus stuff. Go back and you guys need to watch those things. They're so enriching, and there's so many little good nuggets in there that we haven't even talked about because again, we could do a whole episode just on each one of those combined. So do yourselves a favor and go watch.
Yeah, and can we just say about like Kratu's just epic entrance? Like, you get Luke Skywalker's lightsaber igniting sound, which of course I thought about you because you've been somewhat critical. Like, I'm not getting enough Star Wars lightsaber type of sounds, right? You got it literally there, and then she just jumps and she's
sliding
got the
down
epic
the
pose, sliding down the mountain, holding all the rocks back. You get great animation of all of that too. I mean, just a fantastic entry into the scene for Kratu. I thought that was really cool.
She reminds me of that Jedi, again, back to the High Republic.
Yeah.
The one that's with Maz Kanata. What's
Sav.
her name? Yeah, exactly. It's the same kind of look, almost the same kind of look and style, but very similar to that. A little bit younger, but not as creepy looking.
And that's probably, because that's from High Republic Adventures. And I definitely feel like that this is feeling like a High Republic era type of story. It just seems to slot so well into that era. I think this would just work too perfectly there.
Yep. Okay, well, now's the moment of truth. So you've had a chance to watch all 9 of them. We've talked about them ad nauseum at this point. And now I'm going to put you on the spot. And let's start. I can go first or you can go first. It doesn't matter to me. But let's start with our
Are we
lower
Are we
tiered.
trading off or what?
Yeah, lower tiered. So 7, 8, and 9. If you had to rank these, which was 7, 8, and 9 for you for volume 2?
Okay, so number 9, I had The Pit. Number 8, I had In the Stars, surprisingly enough. And number 7, I had I Am Your Mother.
Oh, we have the same number 7. So I have for I Am Your Mother. I have that one as my number 7. My number 8, I actually have Sith. This is going to shock you, I think.
No, actually, I'm not, because you said it was towards the bottom of your list of the first
true.
episode.
I did tell you that. I did.
But nice to see it hadn't changed.
Yep, but this one might shock you. And again, to be clear, like I loved all of these. I think they were great. I don't think there was a bad one in the bunch, and this is unfair to do this. So just that aside,
It is super unfair because you're right. These were we should have prefaced this that I loved each of these for very different reasons, and
Right.
so this was a fantastic season, start to finish, as far as I'm concerned. So
absolutely.
this is
But I
just
have
because
Iowa
Albert's a
Song.
terrible human being.
Sorry, I have Iowa Song as number 9.
That is sad.
I know.
I mean, you're wrong often, but this one you're like really
yeah,
wrong.
but this one really, you really botched this one. Stupid.
All right,
So yeah,
why don't you go into your 4, 5, 6 then?
Okay, so number 6, I have The Pit. So not too far away from where I think you had yours.
Right.
Number 5, I had Journey to the Dark Head. Shocking?
I knew it didn't land for you as strongly as it is for many.
I mean, it felt like, in fairness,
But
like
still
I feel
solid.
like it's in the middle, right? It's not the worst, not the best for me. And then this one, okay, now at this point, my top 4, like,
It's hard.
I can't tell you how many times I like switch these up. So you ask me tomorrow, and this top 4 is going to be totally different, I guarantee you. But for now, right now on air, number 4 is Screecher's Reach. And it's painful even just to say it because there's times in there where I felt like that was the strongest, depending on, certain elements. But I have it at number 4 right now.
This is intriguing what your top 3 are going to be. Okay,
I know.
So,
Yeah.
Number 6 for me was Ao's Song. Again, I thought it was really strong. 5 is Sith for me. The unique animation on this one and the later scenes of it I thought were just really entertaining. Number 4, this is where I had a really hard time too. And number 4 for me was The Spy Dancer. Like I really wanted this in the top 3, but when I looked at the other 3 I had, I was like, this is the one that kind of slips out. But man, these top 4, you can't go wrong with interchanging any of these as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. All right. Well, you're next.
You want to alternate on these? All right. So my number 3 was Journey
Yeah.
to the Dark Head. Yeah, Journey to the Dark Head's my
Okay.
number 3. Yep.
And I had In the Stars, which I think originally was my number 1, but after viewing a few times, I think it slipped just a little bit. But yeah, In the Stars. I mean, I don't know what else to say. We can continue to talk about all these, but again, we're talking about a list type episodes now.
All right.
What was your number 2?
The Bandits of Golak. I really enjoyed this episode so much, visually, storytelling, everything. I just loved it. I love the relationship with the brother and sister and where it goes, and so much fun at the end.
So I had The Spy Dancer as my number 2. So
Strong.
I think originally that was my number 1. So In the Stars was my number 1. Then we did the episode where we covered The Spy Dancer, and I think after that it kind of rose up, especially after the filmmaker focus. I think for me did a lot for this episode.
Yeah, definitely.
It certainly changed how I viewed it, or when I viewed it, or I guess how it viewed it. So that jumped to number 2, and then I got Bandits of Golak as my number 1, and I was like really trying not to be influenced by the fact that it was hot, we were talking about it, we just did a show on it, but there's just so many good things about that episode, beginning to end, in every aspect, every category. I don't know. It as much as it doesn't look like Star Wars, and it looks more like I said at the very beginning, so well steeped in Indian culture, it just works for some reason. And I freaking loved everything about this episode.
I agree with you. It just checks so many boxes, but it does them in unique ways that still feel very true to Star Wars at the baseline. My number 1, Screecher's Reach. I still love that we got kind of a horror story in Star Wars with animated. I just love the idea behind it. I love the twist at the end with the Sith Mother. I just love the cave sequence, turning the Luke thing on its head. So to me, it was still great. And again, I think it's just more that suspense and that horror. I'm not a horror person, but to have this in Star Wars is just so unique. And it was somewhat terrifying, and it was really intense. And you just don't get that. So I rewarded that with my number 1 pick.
Yeah.
Was Screecher's Reach. But again, so many of these, you are not wrong if any one of these are your number 1, because they are all that good. And they all speak to us in very different ways, which I think is the fantastic things about Vision. This was a great season, just all around.
Yeah. No, you're right. And I think when we did the Factpoy just recently. Dante was on. He had a good comment about how he enjoyed Volume 1 more than Volume 2 because it was so steeped in Japanese culture, and that's completely fair. Like if they would have done, like I can't imagine what if they would have done. Let's say they come back and do Volume 3, and it's only studios based in India. We're going to get different variations. Again, all from different aspects of that culture, but we're going to get different styles and different approaches to the Star Wars telling. So this one, though, is so broad that, like you said, there's different things that are going to appeal to different people, different storylines. It could be technical in nature, the sound, the music. We didn't even talk about the music inspiration from Ao's song, right? And how that was kind of a primary driver for the storytelling. But there's such a wide net that's been cast with Volume 2. And it's unfortunate, too, because I don't see a lot of people. I mean, a lot of people are just kind of like, yeah, Star Wars Visions, it's cool. Or, I'm not going to really watch it, not my thing. And I can get that from Volume 1. I think there were a lot of folks that jumped in and felt like, well, this is too Japanese animation for me, and maybe this is not for me. No, it's true. There are people out there that felt like it was not what they, it was a little too much, too heavy-handed. Mm-hmm. But this one feels different because it's not all, anime style. There's a lot of different styles that are being on display here, and a lot of different stories coming from different cultures that I think most people, I wonder if Volume 2 had come out first, if that would have changed anything in terms of the number of people that are viewing it or the number of people that are jumping on board and staying on with this one. Because I don't know this is getting the talk that I think it deserves, I guess is where I'm going.
No, I think it's definitely not. I mean, we see it with just kind of our peers with talking about Visions. Not as many people do it. They don't seem to be quite as popular. But I also
think the numbers, too.
Yeah,
sorry, I was going to say, candidly, like the numbers, like our view, like when we record these shows, it's not like, I don't know, the season finale of Mandalorian and at all. It's like the viewership's down because people are just not as interested.
But this also goes back to what we were talking about last week. I don't think that Western, this is for everybody, right? But I don't think it's really designed at the Western audiences specifically as the primary consumer of this content. I really do think this is really meant to, and we were talking about the Disney Plus numbers, I think is how we were viewing some of this, right?
Yeah.
I think this is really, like, you look at this locally in each of these regions where these studios have, produces content of seeing, okay, do they see the bump there? Are they engaging a new audience that maybe hasn't been as engaged? India is a really unique market. You got over 1 billion people, but how popular is Star Wars really there? There are clearly fans in India, but how many? And does this bring a whole new culture? Does this give a new avenue, for Lucasfilm to grow that market? Same within Europe, same with South Africa, South America, everywhere, right? So I like that this is really not for Western audiences, but it's for us to appreciate and to learn and to really adopt some of these other ideas. I mean, we've joked that I like what-if type scenarios when they're not super stupid and goofy.
Yeah.
And this kind of fits tangentially into some of that, where it's just a scenario where it's just an idea and you have it and you explore it and you just see where it goes. And I love that aspect of Star Wars, and I love these short form storytellings. And I know you and Lauren have some exciting things coming up here you're going to talk about before we end the show tonight. But I really like that short form storytelling. You can just take a moment in time, 15 minutes, tell a story, and then we want more from it. It inspires you. It does something unique that you can't do otherwise. You're not investing a whole an hour and a half or 2 hours of your time. And it really sets you off on a path to enjoy something unique and different. And it gets your imagination going to where you might want to try something new later on. I mean, it's supposed to be inspiring and to open our eyes. And I think doing this in spades, it's just a fantastic. I love that we're doing this. I think it's really great.
Yeah. And thank you for anybody that's not watched the episodes and has come to us to kind of give you the coverage, break them down, and talk about the highlights and all that. But do yourselves a favor. That's flattering, but please go watch these things. Even if you have to spread them out over the course of the next 3 months during the summer when there's really no Star Wars until Ahsoka comes out. Take the time to sit there and watch a couple of these episodes in a single serving and really enjoy them.
And we've said it a couple of times, but you really should watch the filmmaker focus. Usually they're only like 5 or 10 minutes long. They really do add something really unique to it because these are more challenging for us to interpret because it's not our culture that's being shown to us. And so to have that context applied, it's really cool to have that layered over top of it. So when you watch it again, or if you watch it for the first time or whatever it is, you have all of that context and you do have a different lens that you're viewing it through. And to me, it makes it just all the more enjoyable. So I think taking the extra time to do that especially if you just bite these off like at 3 at a time, you can do this within an hour, and it's pretty manageable.
Okay. All right. Well, we will end our coverage with that. Before we go, though, we got you had some shout outs for some folks here.
Yeah, thanks for those who came out to the live stream, cantinacast.com/YouTube if you're listening to this. Jonathan, Sky, Jorge, Stephanie, thank you so much for coming out. We did see some folks out in the background as well. Thank you so much for coming out as my screen decides to turn itself off. So I'm assuming you're still there.
I'm still here. Yep.
Oh, there it
If
goes.
you're within the sound of my voice.
Right. Yeah. So we almost had to do smoke signals to be able to talk to her. But yeah, no. So thank you for coming out to the live stream. What do you and Lauren have coming up while I'm away here soon?
Yeah, so Lauren's going to be filling in on a couple episodes here, 3 episodes to be exact. And so this Thursday, just in 2 days, we'll be talking about short stories. So Lauren's forte right now is, she does everything really, but of course she's very hyper focused on the books and novels and that sort of thing. So we're going to go to something we've not had a chance to cover on this. We've never covered it really on this series at all on the Cantina Cast, and that's the From a Certain Point of View books. I got to be careful because every time we say this, I created a menace with this From a Certain Point of View thing, right? So we got to flip it back and forth. But right. So we're going to go to the Star Wars, the New Hope, From a Certain Point of View. We're going to pull a story from there, talk about that one on Thursday. We've got a story coming up from The Myths and Fables by George Mann. Again, in a book that came out, it's got some really great content. We've never really discussed it, but we're going to pull a story from that on Sunday for the Patreon episode. And then next Thursday, we will come back and do a story from The Empire Strikes Back, From a Certain Point of View. And then at some point down the road, when we get the From a Certain Point of View for Return of the Jedi, their 40th anniversary, we will very likely pull one from there. And you know what I was thinking, Jonesy, as an aside, right here on the spot, brainstorming, whiteboarding right now. We need to pull all 3 stories that Adam Christopher wrote from all of these, from a certain point of certain character that we're all familiar with now.
And follow the arc.
And just follow the arc and do a story and talk about him. And maybe we can ask him to get back on the show and kind of whack some of the ideas and stuff behind it. But that would be a lot of fun to do because I don't think anybody's going to tackle that. So, but yeah, so we're going to get into some of those short stories and hopefully you guys enjoy those too, because there's so many great stories in there that are really fun to talk about. So I think it's going to be a great show. So join us in a couple days for that one. And then we'll still be doing all the other ones too. So we'll do Wayfinder this weekend. For all the new stuff. We'll do a Tatooine. I was going to call it Manhunt, but that's from the
Trading
Star Wars
Post.
RPG.
Yep.
Tatooine.
Trading Post, yep.
Trading Post. We'll do that one as well. So lots and lots of content coming, even though our good friend here won't be with us for next couple of episodes.
It's going to be great. I look forward to the content. I mean, it's good for a nice change of pace and to be able to bring light to some of this. The content doesn't always get to surface. When you got a book full of short stories, how do you pick them, and then how do you talk about all of them? And there's some that are just really cool and great conversation starters at the very least. And so I'm excited to see what y'all do with that.
Yeah, it's easy. You tell Lauren, hey, you have to pick this one. That's how it worked. So she did. I won't spoil it here. You'll see. We'll get the artwork here very soon.
All right, well, okay. No pressure, Lauren, but expectations are now high.
Yeah. Don't screw it up. Any final thoughts or anything before we go?
No, thanks everyone. Appreciate it.
All right, guys. We'll see you guys here in just a few days.
You're still listening? Wow. That's amazing. Well, I'm here to give you the disclaimer. Normally we do a big, long, drawn-out disclaimer thing saying what's what and who's what and all that other stuff, but I think you guys kind of know that Lucasfilm and Disney have no affiliation with us at all, and we have none with them. We talk about Star Wars, which is their property, and all that other good, fun stuff, but I think you can tell which is our stuff and which is their stuff. If you can't, well, then send a lawyer to send an email to me, and I'll be glad to chat with them. Other than that, you know what's what, so that's your disclaimer.